My name is Jamal bin Omar, and I am former Under Secretary General at the United Nations, former Special Envoy, and former Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General. I'm also the chair of the International Center for Dialogue Initiative. ICDI is an independent platform focused on conflict resolution and mediation in the Middle East, North Africa, and the Sahel regions. Our aim is to empower local and regional actors, including civil society, to play a more prominent and leading role in mediating the conflict that affect them, instead of continuing to rely on foreign and international actors who have their own interest. This podcast, titled ICDI Dialogues, accompanies our monthly newsletter, Diplomacy Now. Through the podcast, we hope to challenge the status quo of both Western-led diplomatic initiatives and conventional diplomatic discourse by inviting leading voices from the regions and countries affected by conflict, instead of relying on analysis from the usual pundits who dominate the media. In this episode, we turn to the 12-day war that erupted after Israel launched what it called preemptive strikes on Iran that were followed by attacks by the United States. The 7 attacks initiated by 2 states with nuclear weapons, the United States and Israel, against a state without them has huge implications for both nuclear diplomacy and diplomacy in the Middle East and beyond. We explored these issues in our previous edition of Diplomacy Now, titled A Month of Blood, Bluff and Blast. Today we have 2 esteemed guests, Dr. Trita Parsi and Dr. Farah Jan, who will discuss implications of the 12-day war and the prospects for negotiation and mediation in the aftermath. Dr. Parsi is an award-winning author and the 2010 recipient of the Grothmeyer Award for Ideas Improving the World Order. He is the Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft and an expert on U.S.-Iranian relations, Iranian foreign policy, and the geopolitics of the Middle East. Washingtonian Magazine named Dr. Parsi as one of 25 most influential voices on foreign policy, and Noam Chomsky calls Dr. Parsi one of the most distinguished scholars on Iran. He is also the co-founder and former president of the National Iranian American Council. Dr. Parsi has followed the Middle East politics through work in the field and extensive experience on Capitol Hill and the United Nations. He regularly appears as a guest commentator for leading global media outlets. Dr. Farah Jan is an international relations senior lecturer at University of Pennsylvania. She received her PhD from Rutgers University, New Brunswick. Dr. Jan's research focuses on interstate rivalries and alliances, the causes and consequences of nuclear proliferation, and security politics of South Asia and the Middle East. Her writing has appeared in a range of scholarly and policy-relevant publications, including Foreign Policy, Arab News, Sharq al-Awsat, Foreign Policy Journal of Democracy and Security. She has also contributed to Diplomacy Now, her most recent article titled How the 12-Day Conflict Could Unleash a New Nuclear Disorder. Welcome to both of you. And let me start with the first question. With Israel-US recent attacks on Iran, it will be fair to say that past diplomatic effort had failed. What went wrong? Had Iran, the region, and the world got into this mess? And let me start with you, Dr. Parsi.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be with you and Dr. John. I actually would rephrase that question. I don't think it's diplomacy that failed. Diplomacy was never fully exhausted. It is not so that they actually went a large number of rounds of negotiations and actually really tried hard to come to a compromise. What you had was a situation in which the United States rather prematurely abandoned diplomacy after having changed the goalpost halfway through the negotiations. It's clear from the public record that the original position of the Trump administration in these negotiations was that it would look for a verification-based solution, similar to what the JCPOA was, that would limit Iran's enrichment capabilities and inspect those very significantly and intrusively. Whereas a couple of weeks or so into it, the Trump administration adopted the Netanyahu position, which is that Iran's nuclear program has to be completely obliterated, zero enrichment, dismantlement. At that point, it was clear, although it wasn't entirely clear how committed Trump was to that, that there would be no new diplomatic solution because the United States was not looking for a compromise. It was looking for Iran's complete capitulation. In fact, in one interview, he said that that's what he's looking for. He wants capitulation from the Iranians. That's not diplomacy. And as a result, I think it's unfair to say that diplomacy failed. What happened is that the Trump administration shifted the goalpost, and then once that didn't work because the Iranians were not likely at all and under any circumstance to capitulate, he caved in further to the Israeli demands and essentially green-lighted their military action and then joined in. Had he stuck to his original red line, which was that there could be enrichment in Iran, but it would have to be limited, would have to be inspected, I actually think that they would have had a nuclear deal by end of June of this year.
Okay, let me ask you another follow-up question related to this. What could be a fair and candid assessment of past diplomatic efforts under Obama, Biden, and Trump more recently?
It's a rather big question, but the only one of them that actually truly pursued diplomacy in an exhaustive way was President Obama, and he also has something to show for it, is because he ultimately succeeded. Biden did not. Biden could have walked back into the JCPOA on day one through an executive order. Instead, he wanted to renegotiate the deal using Trump's sanctions, the very sanctions that he opposed, supposedly. But once he was president, he wanted to use them as leverage. And that caused a complete collapse of things. I mean, I think the Iranians committed numerous mistakes as well. At the end of the day, there was some sort of a deal that could be had. But don't take it from me. Take it from Biden's own nuclear negotiator that said that a difference between Trump and Biden was that at least at one point, Trump was eager to get a deal, whereas Biden was always lukewarm towards getting a deal. And you're not going to get a deal approaching it in a lukewarm way. To get an agreement between two countries with this history, with this extent of animosity and challenges and technical and political problems, you need to have a tremendous amount of political will and willingness to sacrifice other political objectives. Biden never had that. Trump, on the other hand, in the first case, in the first term, was not even pursuing diplomacy in a serious way. In this term, he was for a couple of weeks, but something happened. We don't know the full answer to it. I've spoken to numerous people in or around the Trump circle, and no one has a clear answer as to why Trump actually caved in on the Israeli demands halfway through the negotiations.
And taking into account everything that you said about past efforts, what lessons can be learned from all these previous rounds of diplomatic efforts?
I would say two lessons above all. One is it requires a tremendous amount of political will from both sides. You saw that during the Rouhani government and the Obama administration. It took years. They remained committed to it. They insulated the negotiations to make sure that no other developments, regional or between the two of them, would actually compromise the negotiations. And secondly, at the end of the day, it has to be a compromise. You want to get a lot from the other side, you have to offer a lot. So what you saw with the JCPOA was that there was a genuine compromise between the different sides. The Iranian gave a lot on the centrifuges, on limitations, etc. And on the other hand, the United States lifted the sanctions. The Europeans did as well. So it is, if there is a deal, it has to be based on a compromise, not based on one side dictating an ultimatum and expecting the other side to capitulate. That's a pathway towards war, and that's exactly what Trump achieved by shifting his position to the Israeli red line.
Thank you. Let me turn to Dr. Jan. What would be the implications of the attacks on Iran and everything that happened, what will be the implications for the international nuclear governance regime?
Thank you, Jamal, and thank you for having me. And the implications are severe on multiple fronts. First, the NPT itself is under threat. Iran has suspended cooperation with the IAEA, and all that we know, it may well withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And I think this would be catastrophic for the global non-proliferation regime. What we saw in June is what that did is set a dangerous precedent where two nuclear-armed states attacked an NPT member's nuclear facilities. I'd argue this violates long-standing norms and multiple UN resolutions against attacking civilian nuclear infrastructure. Furthermore, this also impacted the IAEA's credibility. It kind of puts that under question. Iran is blaming the agency for enabling these attacks by providing information through inspections. And this puts the IAEA in an impossible position and may take other countries or may make other countries reluctant to cooperate with future inspections. Now, there's a real proliferation risk that I argued in the piece that I wrote for you guys as well as the others, is other countries may conclude that the only thing that actually deters an attack is a nuclear weapon. I think that kind of encourages other states in the region to pursue a nuclear program. And what we have now is we have this verification gap with no IAEA inspections or inspectors able to access Iran's program during this critical post-conflict period.
I'm going to ask you, Dr. Jan, another question that is related. How do you think the UN and its nuclear watchdog agency performed before and during this crisis? We know the Security Council is paralyzed, basically. The role of the UN generally in peace and security is in steep decline. Ukraine, Gaza, the Iran crisis also. But what's your assessment, and in particular the watchdog agency?
Right. The IAEA's performance has been mixed. Before the crisis, what they did, they continued monitoring despite Iranian restrictions and provided regular reports showing Iran's uranium enrichment acceleration. Now, during the crisis, we've seen Director General Grossi responded to this, calling for restraints and offering to deploy safety experts. With that said, the agency's limitations were starkly exposed. They couldn't prevent the attacks or ensure immediate post-strike access to the damaged sites. Now, what's most problematic, or most problematically, they're now caught in the middle, with Iran blaming them for providing targeting information through their inspections. The UN Security Council showed even greater limitations, and we've seen that even in the case of Gaza. Despite emergency sessions, they were unable to prevent escalation. The council was split between Western powers supporting Israel and others backing Russia and China, mostly backing Iran. All we got were symbolic statements calling for restraints with no concrete actions. And I think that, to me, shows a fundamental structural weakness of the veto system. I think that's preventing any meaningful intervention. As I mentioned, this is similar to what we also see with regards to the catastrophic situation in Gaza.
So, Dr. Jan, against this background, what do you think, what lessons can be drawn, and what will be the implications generally for international peace and security?
I think the first lesson that we can take from this is military solutions are temporary at best. The strikes may have set back Iran's program, but they certainly can't eliminate nuclear knowledge or expertise. Secondly, I think what really stands out to me is diplomacy requires sustained, patient commitment. Short-term deadlines that the Trump administration was providing and military threats along with diplomacy simply undermines any negotiation process. We've also learned that bilateral approaches are insufficient for regional challenges. We need to have a comprehensive regional security architecture put in place. The biggest thing that comes out of this is that the non-proliferation regime itself is now at risk. The NPT's credibility has been severely damaged by the strikes, the US engagement in that as well. And we may see new nuclear arms race in the Middle East or with other regional powers.
Dr. Parsi, do you have anything to add to what Dr. Tran said on this issue?
No, I strongly agree, and I think I just would want to emphasize that as important as it is for the non-proliferation regime to continue to remain in place and for the credibility of the IAEA to remain strong, we do have to acknowledge that its credibility has taken a significant hit during this period. There was no condemnation by the IAEA of this clear violation. I believe it's Article 56 of the Geneva Conventions, in which there was an attack against an active nuclear plant or facility. Secondly, the very, and I think unnecessarily strongly worded IAEA resolution that was passed is believed in many quarters to have acted as a political lubricant for the Israelis to attack. I'm personally not terribly convinced by this because I think the Israelis would have done it anyways. And then thirdly, also, of course, if any evidence emerges that IAEA shared information about the Iranian scientists, the names of them, etc., which had been provided to the IAEA by Tehran as part of the transparency measure. If it turns out that had been leaked to the Israelis and the Israelis used that in order to identify and assassinate them, then that is a huge problem going forward for other countries collaborating with the IAEA. And as much as Iran's nuclear conduct needs to be investigated, these are also things that I think ultimately need to be investigated in order to ensure that the agency has credibility going forward.
Thank you. Dr. Jan, another question against the background that you described and everything that Dr. Parsi explained, what do you think will be the most likely scenarios in the future?
It's just a guess at the moment, but if I were to be in the guessing game or betting game, I'd say in the short term, we'd see the fragile ceasefire kind of will hold, but with periodic violations. In the medium term, I would say Iran faces a critical question: return to negotiations or actively pursue a nuclear weapons program. If pressures continue, they may withdraw from the NPT, and we'll see how that plays out. But for long-term scenarios, I see four possibilities. One would be a diplomatic breakthrough with new framework, including a security guarantee. Two would be controlled escalation with limited military exchanges that stop short of full war. And three, a regional configuration where the conflict spreads and draws in with multiple actors. And finally, as I have been talking about this in the previous questions you asked as well, nuclear proliferation where multiple regional powers will acquire nuclear weapons, which I think would be the worst case scenario. I think there's a lot that depends on what happens in Gaza and if we see a ceasefire that takes place. So that's what I would be predicting. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Parsi, anything you want to say about most likely scenarios?
I may have a bit more of a pessimistic view, although I, by and large, agree with Dr. John on this. First of all, I think the Iranians, if they choose to go for a nuclear weapon, does not mean that they will end diplomacy. It will probably be simultaneously as they're conducting diplomacy. Anything that would actually really alarm the world, such as walking out of the NPT, ending diplomacy, would only intensify the risks that they're running if they are simultaneously dashing towards a bomb. I think we have to be honest that as a result of this attack, the debate inside of Iran has changed. The public's attitudes appear to have changed. Attitudes of other countries' publics have changed. 59% or so of the Turkish population now favor a nuclear weapon, even without any other country in the region gaining nuclear weapons, which is a significant shift. It's a direct result of what the United States and Israel did here. And I suspect the same thing has happened in the Iranian public as well as within the Iranian elite. I fear that the more immediate term is that the Israelis are going to try to attack Iran again within potentially as short of a window as the next couple of weeks. I think the reason for this is that the Israelis had several different objectives with their attack. One was, of course, to drag the US into it, and for the first time, they finally succeeded. But it failed in the sense that it was just a one-time attack. Rather, the Israelis had hoped that the United States would be intimately involved in a longer-term campaign. So I think there is an effort to restart that in order to see if they can drag the US into something longer. They had tried to decapitate the Iranian regime within the first 12 or so hours. They certainly had some intelligence successes, but ultimately failed to decapitate the regime. And the regime also regained control over its command and control within 12 to 18 hours. Third, they were hoping, and this hope is something that they can still pursue, that they will turn Iran into a Syria or a Lebanon, a country that Israel, independently of the United States, can bomb on a regular basis without paying any consequence for it. That's the scenario they've had with Lebanon. That's the scenario they've had with Syria for more than a decade now. And they do so on a regular basis, mowing the lawn strategy. And they were hoping to turn Iran into that as well, in order to make sure that Iran never manages to rebuild its air defenses or rebuild its missile program or its nuclear program. They will try again. I find it very unlikely that they won't. The political window for that will probably close sometime after December or January. Whether they are militarily ready is, of course, is a different story, because despite what is out in the public realm, I think the Israelis actually took a lot of hits during these 12 days. Their air defenses suffered. They don't have enough of a stockpile of interceptors. 25% of all THAAD interceptors were consumed during these 12 days. The Israelis were running out of the Arrow 3. And as a result, this was much more costly to the Israelis than what the official story is. But nevertheless, as long as they believe that they can still drag the US into it, it's worth for Israel to try again. And I suspect that they will, and will do so before the end of the year, perhaps as early as end of August, particularly if you have a snapback decision at the UN at the time.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Well, you both underlined the need for a mediated solution, not a military solution to this conflict. So we hope that there will be some mediation that will settle this, hopefully once for all. But moving forward, what would be a fair mediation process? How it should look like? Who should participate in this mediation? Do you see the Europeans, like under Obama, they were very involved in JCPOA? Some countries from the region. Any mediation will need a facilitator. And who would be the facilitator? Is it still US? They attack Iran and they still want to claim to be facilitators, as they often claim. And then what would be the objective or the framework for such mediation? I know this is a long question, but it's, in a nutshell, if there is going to be mediation with Iran, how it should look like.
I'll take a quick stab at it and I'll let Dr. Parsi continue. Let's say start off with an effective mediation process simply needs the right mediators. Someone that is more neutral and trusted by all sides. The EU fits in that category. Switzerland or Japan could fill that role. China would be important, but we have to keep in mind the current relationship with China. most importantly, I think the process should also establish direct, continuous channels between these parties, not just shuttle diplomacy. It needs to be more of a phased approach with confidence building measures at each stage. And it must address the security concerns of all parties, not just the nuclear issue.
Dr. Parsi, you studied all past diplomatic efforts and you followed this very closely. What do you think?
I strongly agree that there needs to be a neutral mediator that is trusted by all. I frankly think that they already have one. Oman has been very effective in the past, was effective in these rounds. The problem was not with the mediator. The problem was with the US shifting its position towards something that has never worked. So I think with Oman, you probably still have the best option. Switzerland, as Dr. Johnson mentioned, is probably also in the cards. I don't think the E3 at all are effective, useful, or needed. They don't have any particular leverage. They don't add anything. We have already seen that the EU more or less have turned themselves into complete vacillation, a vassal state or continent for the United States. Japan has been useful in the past as well, but only to a point, because ultimately Japan's entire security is based on its relationship with the United States facing China. So it's not, it's neutral in the sense of not having any particular hostility towards Iran or the US, but it's not neutral in the sense of its complete dependence on the US. The other problem, of course, is that many of the countries that actually can moderate or mediate or facilitate are not necessarily willing to do so because the United States doesn't have a track record of treating its mediators particularly well. Look at how the Qataris have been mediating between Israel and Hamas and have paid a very heavy price for it in Washington. So there's a cost that comes with mediation as well. But ultimately, I personally do think that the Omanis are actually very well suited to continue this, but there's no magic that the mediators can pull off if the parties themselves are not adopting realistic positions. And so far, unfortunately, again, after halfway through, the US shifted its position towards something completely unworkable. And there's nothing the Japanese, the Omanis, the Swiss, or anyone else could have done about it.
Can I just add one question? And this is a question for Dr. Parsi. Do you think the Saudis can play a role if the Saudis, the Pakistanis, and or the Indians for that matter, can they play any role in future mediation?
I would rule out the Indians for now, but I think with the Saudis, yes. But I think here again, we have to have a distinction between a country that helps facilitate certain things and someone that actually acts as a mediator that takes it from step one all the way to the final goalpost. Even in the case of Iran and Saudi Arabia, Oman, Iraq played critical roles in mediating that, but they couldn't push it over the finishing line, and the Chinese came in at the very end of it and managed to push it over the finishing line. In the case of Saudi Arabia, I think the Saudis actually can play a very constructive role in facilitating certain very high-level connections between the two sides. Ultimately, however, I don't think the Saudis are going to be a fit for a mediation, though, that would actually bring it from zero all the way over the finishing line. But they can play a role somewhere along that journey. The Omanis are, precisely because of their neutrality, unlike the Saudis, who have their own rivalry with Iran, which just a few years ago was extremely intense and negative. The Omanis do not have that history with Iran or with the United States, and as a result, are very well fit for this. And also something I think we tend to forget about the Omanis. The Qatari story is much more known, but the Omanis also have played a very significant role mediating other conflicts, including the end of apartheid. It's just that their style has been to never talk about it and keep everything secret and very discreet. That is now starting to change, and the Omanis have been much more open, and the Omani foreign minister himself was directly involved in these facilitations. That was not the case with the previous Sultan or the previous foreign minister.
Pakistan as a mediator.
An interesting question. I don't think I can give you a direct answer to it. obviously they have their relationship with Iran. I don't know where things stand right now between the United States and Pakistan for it to be able to play that role. It also doesn't have that historical memory or institutional equipment to do so, whereas the Omanis have a very, very long history of doing this.
You know, if I can go back to the countries of the region and how they view mediation, I still recall when the Obama administration was negotiating with Iran, and at that time I was the UN Special Envoy for Yemen, and I was traveling extensively in the region, and I was meeting with Gulf state leaders regularly. One thing I remember hearing from all of them is that not necessarily opposition to the approach of the Obama administration and their objectives from the mediation. The impression that I had from what I recall, it's like if they wanted a seat at the table. Is this your impression too, Dr. Parsi? Before now?
I think there's a significant shift. Back in those days, the Saudis and the Emiratis were essentially on the side of Israel of not wanting to see a deal. We're very worried what this would mean in terms of an American shift towards the Iranians, as well as this leading to the United States essentially helping secure a cementation of Iran's role in the region, particularly its role in Syria and Yemen and other places. I think that has shifted dramatically. The Saudis in particular have shifted their view in the sense that they understand now that war would be terrible for them. It would completely jeopardize many of their own economic and diplomatic plans. They also recognize that there's not going to be a rapprochement between the US and Iran that would replace Saudi Arabia in a matter that they were worried about before. Also, I think there's something else that has happened. The Saudis were very worried about Iranian domination over the region, and they had developed their own relations with the United States to be able to counter that, but also a relationship with the United States to be able to counter any undue pressure from Israel on the GCC countries. After Gaza, however, I think many of the strategists in GCC capitals are wondering, what use is the United States to them as a guarantor against any Israeli aggression? Because what we've seen, of course, in the last year and a half is that the United States has never really stood firmly against or restrained Israel in any meaningful role here. What if Israel would end up in a conflict with any of the GCC states? Can it count on the United States restraining Israel? I don't think they have a comfortable answer to that question, which then means that a region in which Iran is completely defeated and Israel establishes some form of a military hegemony over the region is one that is also very dangerous to them. So out of pure self-interest, I think circumstances have changed, calculations have changed accordingly as well.
Dr. Jan, do you have anything to add on this issue?
No, I fully agree with what Dr. Parsi mentioned. So,
okay, very good. Let me ask you now, a question that relates to the implications of what happened, the 12-day war. First, what have been the implications when it comes to internal Iranian politics? I know that the attack on Iran aimed at decapitating the regime and probably and their thinking and unleashing havoc in the country, and this didn't happen. But I'm sure there must have been some implications. And then we touched on this, before, but let's address it now specifically. How is this going to affect the geopolitics of the region? Dr. Parsi.
So on the internal situation in Iran, I think one of the things that the Israelis were surprised by, and I have to say myself, was also a bit surprised by, was a very significant and strong rallying around the flag phenomenon. I think it was fair to expect that there would be some level of that when a country is attacked. It's just simply normal. But it was much stronger than I think expected, particularly mindful of the unpopularity of the Iranian regime. and the manner in which it has conducted itself internally. So this, I think, took the Israelis by quite a lot of surprise. And I think we have seen that there is a huge opening inside Iran right now for greater degree of reconciliation between society and government, particularly mindful of the deep divisions that really came to the fore under the protest around Masa Amini's death in 2022. And I think that the government also recognizes, of course, that this is crucial for their own security. Had there been a different reaction by Iranian society, the decapitation effort by the Israelis could potentially have ended up becoming successful. Also, in fact, much of the anger towards the government may also have been one of the reasons why the Israeli Mossad had been quite remarkably successful in recruiting a lot of people inside of Iran. And in order to be able to block that in the future, there has to be something done to be able to reconcile that gap between society and the government. Whether that will be successful in the long run requires deep, deep reorientation in Iran and reconciliation that cannot be superficial. And what we've seen so far is intense, but probably is quite superficial, probably won't last much longer unless it is follow up with some profound policy shifts as well. Some of them we have seen. By all effects, there is no implementation, at least not in the larger cities, of the hijab, the mandatory hijab. It's still a law on the books, but not being implemented and enforced. But much more than that needs to be done to be able to bring society and government closer together.
Thank you. Dr. Jan, what's your take?
I fully agree with Dr. Parsi. I think the attacks have strengthened the hardliners who argue that diplomacy has failed and military strength is the only option. I would say on the regional front, the geopolitical landscape has shifted dramatically. Iran's positions weakened. And that's kind of created a power vacuum that others will try to fill. I'd say Turkey is already positioning itself as both a mediator and the emerging regional power, and so is Saudi Arabia. On the global stage, I would say Russia and China see this as an opportunity to expand their influence in the Middle East, while the US is distracted by multiple crises around the world. I would say countries across the region are at the moment reassessing their security partnerships and alignments. And the crisis has fundamentally altered Middle East dynamics in ways that extend far beyond the nuclear issue and will reshape the regional order for decades to come. And I think the biggest casualty of all of this is US credibility in the region.
Dr. Parsi, any final words?
I think that's absolutely spot on. And I think in particular, what Dr. John said about Turkey positioning itself. And we've seen already that as Turkey has positioned itself as someone who would take over or fill some of that vacuum, how that immediately put Turkey in the firing line of the Israelis, who have started to talk about Erdogan being the greatest threat to instability in the region. And Turkey's success in Syria, of course, contributed significantly to that as well. So I think this is not the end of any of these geopolitical rumblings. It's just the next phase of it. And I think we will see that the Israelis will continue to try to get Western countries to isolate, sanction, punish any country in the region that manages to pose at least a theoretical challenge to Israel's desire for military domination in the region. And I think usually we don't think of Israel as a hegemonic power because it doesn't have any ambition for cultural or economic hegemony, but it does have a security doctrine that essentially necessitates military hegemony for its own security. I think it's going to be the downfall of Israel because no one state can, particularly a state that is so dependent on a superpower, can sustain such a policy. But that is the path that they're on. And unless that path changes, we're going to see some sort of a confrontation or clash between Turkey and Israel within the next 5 to 10 years.
Dr. Parsi, Dr. Jan, thank you for joining us today. We enjoyed the conversation. You enlightened us on a complex set of issues that are going to be with us for, I'm afraid, years to come. So thank you for joining us, and hope to host you again, and to discuss these issues and other developments in the region. Once again, thank you.
Thank you so much.